Hi there, I'm Trevor Coote, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. Tara Black co-founded Origin Gluten Free Bakery 16 years ago in Victoria, BC, Canada. Navigating the growth of the business, the financial strain of the global pandemic, the breakdown of her business relationship, and the decision to launch an international franchise are just some of the stories you'll hear from Tara. I hope you enjoy this episode. Tara Black, welcome to the podcast. I want to start, we'll get into kind of the journey that you've had through business, but what was your introduction to entrepreneurship, to being a business owner? Was it spontaneous, like random and spontaneous, or was it something that you had always aspired to kind of be involved in?
I think if you were to talk to a lot of people that have known me throughout my life, they'd probably think it was planned. I didn't have any aspirations. It actually only hit over the course of the last couple of years. And quite honestly, it was through the MBA program where people were like, no, you're an entrepreneur. And I was like, I run a business. And they're like, no, you're an entrepreneur. But it really actually took being hit over the head, possibly multiple times, to actually really engage with that. And the oddity in that is the fact that I've actually mentored for 9 years many entrepreneurs through like what it means to run their business, what to look at for effective systems, how to handle difficult HR situations, how to financially make themselves viable. And like, I have these skill sets, I have a wealth of knowledge, I've practiced it for a really long time, and yet only in the last couple of years that I was like, oh yeah, no, okay, that title fits. As far as like the aspiration to be an entrepreneur, I don't have this like drive to do everything on my own. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I love collaboration and I like downtime, and I really prioritize my family and my space and my time with that, and for myself. So knowing all of those pieces, most people will wonder why I would be an entrepreneur, because there's this myth, which sadly can live in reality, that entrepreneurs are a slave to their business, that they don't get downtime, that they're not allowed to prioritize their families. And that's actually what drove me to open up the business that I do run, was that I've done entrepreneurial activities for other organizations that I was working with or working for. And then I realized one day, I was like, I could do this. I could keep doing this. At the time, I was an executive pastry chef at a hotel in town. Like, totally fine. I had started up their pastry shop from the ground up, and that way it was like that entrepreneurial vision of what doesn't exist, bring it into fruition, get people trained, get people implemented into things. But I was working 70 hours a week. I was making let's call it a fair wage, but based on salary. So it didn't matter how many hours you were working, you were making the same amount.
Right.
My kids were young. We had lots of resources in order to make sure they were really well looked after, but I was not getting the time with them that I wanted. And anytime I tried to prioritize that, it became to have a bit of a whiplash effect with what I was doing professionally. And I kind of just took a step back and was like, damn, if I was working for myself, I could work less, which is usually not what you hear.
Right. That's interesting.
Most people are like, well, how in the hell did you pull that off? And that's the intention I've had from the very beginning. For the first couple of months that the business was open, I worked long days. There was a lot of the juggle of what you hear all the time. But within 3 weeks of being open, we had hired 2 staff. And then that trickled and grew over the course of 6 months to 25 staff. And after 1 year, I was working 25 hours a week. So I went from working 70 hours a week to 25. Like, huge difference.
Yeah.
I was making the same amount of money. I had way more time with my family. And that's kind of been the prioritized vision all the way along. So my kids are, oh, what were they? When we actually opened up the very first store, it was for 5 and 7, and they are now
Oh,
19 and 22. And
right.
they actually both work in the business, and I never foresaw that either. But it's been an awesome, pretty journey. Like I like it. I've never stayed in any position for anything over 3 years. So to be in it for 16 years is, and to still want to be in it, that's
Right.
kind of cool.
That's awesome. I definitely want to dig into, because a big part of what I think, there's the idea, I hope, is that listeners will be able to take some lessons away from this, whether they're the lessons on the backs of others who have made mistakes, and people can learn from that in advance. But
Mhm.
also a big one, I think, is this balance, is this, how do I run a business? How do I be an entrepreneur, be a business owner, and still leave that time that I want for myself? So I think it sounds like that's a real opportunity for people to hear that from you. So we're going to get back to that. I do want to dive into this business ownership versus entrepreneurialism, because I think that is something that you kind of cleared it up, but I think that's something too. But let's before we get into all of that and get further down the road, let's tell listeners what is the business. What is it that you opened up 16
Oh,
years
right.
ago, and did it exist previous, or was it and I think you had a business partner when you first started, so maybe lay some of that groundwork.
Yeah. Over the course of 16 years, lots has changed.
Yeah.
Um, so oh God, this sounds like a press release when I say it like this. The original entity, the original entity is actually Origin Gluten Free Bakery. Um, it was a limited partnership. It was with myself and one of my best friends for like a duration of time. We were actually going to open up a preserves company, like something based around local fruit and produce, because we have so much. And then I've been in the culinary world since I was 13. I'm 45. It's been a while. At the time, at the time, I was 28, 29 when I was thinking about these things. Um, and it was just like, okay, well, I have a lot of knowledge as far as culinary space goes, application and production. Um, I'd been in management since I was 19, so I had a good solid 10 years of various forms of management. And so I understood leading teams, and I had helped open yeah, three different organizations and three very different models. One was a pastry shop for a local hotel. One was actually helping to open up a brand new bakery and cafe setting. And the other was actually setting up pastry and gelato for an expanding company, something that had gone from a local bakery cafe to a commissary setting, and then they opened up 5 locations. So in all of those, I'd been at the ground floor and getting it going, starting it up, very much from that entrepreneurial side of it, but being employed by those various different companies. So for Origin, it was through all those experiences that the dietary requests would come in. People would come in for a hotel or at the bakeries, special occasions. Somebody's getting married, there's a graduation, somebody's passed away, but they have people that have dietary requirements, restrictions. Could you make this?
Right.
Blah, 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 blah. Carry on. They'd come back, they're like, that was excellent, it was so good, I really want it again. And the response was typically, well, I'm thrilled that worked for you this time, but it's too expensive to do it ongoing, because you have to shut
Right.
down the whole kitchen and sanitize it all, bring in special ingredients, blah, 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 blah. So as one-offs, we could make it work, but as a continuation, any one of those sites can do it. So with that knowledge, I was like, well, if that's all we do, if all I did was gluten-free baking, we could make it accessible. We could make it approachable, meaning that Like you'd be able to find it, you'd be able to come in, you'd be able to interact with it in a way that it's not scary. And maybe even it could be normalized for the people that need that. So that's where that started from. And I gotta be honest, every once in a while, I wonder what in the hell I got myself into because I'm not a celiac. So
Right.
my
Yeah.
entire professional life is wrapped around something that I have no actual need for.
And so, I mean, when people look at business opportunity, I mean, there's a ton of market research. Typically, sometimes people just, this is a passion of mine, and I see this opportunity, I want to just go do it, and we'll figure it out if it's going to work. But 16 years ago, you're kind of on, just the kind of the brink of kind of the whole gluten-free environment being normalized, to use your word, or being more common and sought after. Was there a lot of market research that you did to determine that this would there's a market out there beyond just the odd wedding?
Yeah, no, we did quite a bit of market research. We actually wanted to prove the market. Victoria is actually pretty small, right? Like we're
Right.
located in Victoria, BC, on Vancouver Island. So your boundaries are pretty tight.
Yeah.
And Victoria at the time had around 350,000 people in its entirety, spread out neighborhoods captured. And what we knew at the time was that national and international research had celiac disease pegged at around 1% of the population. So 1% of 350,000 people in Victoria would likely need the products we were going to make. That does not sound like a good case study to open up a business with any kind of viability to it. So we knew it was a good idea. We needed to prove that the market did exist beyond just that one statistic. So we opened up a market stall for 6 months in downtown
Oh.
Victoria. We only operated it on the Saturdays. We only operated for 4 hours on a Saturday. And mainly because my kitchen at home was the test kitchen. So we had to basically shut down the kitchen for any kind of family need. It was like, take out, you need to leave the house to go eat. Sanitize it down, make a bunch of prototype product, take it to the market, sell it to everybody that knew, or as that market was starting to become aware of this option. And we did that from May and through October. By the end of October, there was a local restaurant that offered their kitchen so we could do commercial sales, because there were a couple of different restaurants and local markets that wanted to pick up our products. And we said, sure. So we started using their kitchen on Saturdays, and we opened up a website that allowed people to place orders throughout the week, and then we would just produce to what the orders were. We did that until March 1st, 2010, when we opened up the first store. Because through that market research, we were able to prove to different lenders, give us some money, we'll be good for it.
Okay, so let's talk about that. The stress and the pressure that comes with opening a business from scratch, right? And to use some bakery terminology, from scratch. Do you see what I did
That's
there?
a
That was
segue, nice.
very, very clever. It was very clever. So right. So you do your market research, you do some testing out in the market. What was that first exposure to seeking financing, and what did that whole, you found a space, you wanted to do leaseholds in it, and you put up some capital yourselves, I'm guessing?
This is the funniest part of our little story at the very beginning.
Oh,
I
good.
had young kids and no assets
You put them up
and
as
collateral.
collateral?
No, actually, I didn't. It would be great if you actually could leverage. You can't. In fact, we
Yeah.
were told multiple times children's are liabilities. So
Right.
I was like, oh.
Right.
I mean, I would like to phrase it that children are investments, but apparently that doesn't hold true.
No.
Yeah, so the beginning and getting the financing and like planning out the leaseholds, having had the experience of being involved in multiple startups, I was well versed in what that looked like, what the time turnaround had to be. My family's all in construction, so I also had realistic ideas of what it meant to actually take on a space. How quickly can you turn it around? I know how to look at an electrical panel. I know what kind of plumbing we require. I know what can be grandfathered and what couldn't. I also had the unique position in the fact that my stepfather is a building inspector. Being aware of what you can do and what you can't do when you're just scanning a place is a good little skill to have in your pocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're a 5 foot girl who most people look at saying, she doesn't know what she's doing. Um, so it was fortunate. We found a space that had been a bakery. So it was an easy renovation for us.
Nice.
We knew exactly what we needed as far as equipment, and we knew where we could get it from. We had secured pricing on it already. It actually took us from the time we signed the lease to opening date 5 weeks to get it turned over.
Holy cow.
So that was, and we opened on time.
Yeah.
And finding the seed money for it, because we'd used the market to prove the market, like that summer market. We had saved, I believe, I think we made around $15,000. So we had a little bit of seed money that showed some leverage. And we didn't need a lot to get it going. Things were much cheaper
Right.
16
Yeah.
months
Yeah. Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And because the space had already been a bakery, the remediation work wasn't as expensive as it could have been. So between like family help with the construction, those other nuances, we actually only needed to secure around $60,000 worth of funds, which is next to nothing when you look at starting up a business, especially in like food and hospitality. So that was good. And we had planned very conservatively for what we expected the pickup to be. And because of that, we exceeded those expectations within 3 to 4 months of being open. So that put us in a really healthy financial space. So in that scenario, that was actually not stressful. Those
Yeah.
pieces were not stressful. What
Yeah.
has been really stressful is the last 4 years, because our business had never experienced the incredible constraints of the complete unknown, right? So COVID has, I think what most small business goes through in their beginning years is we've gone through it in our most recent years. So it's like
Right.
totally flipped. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. 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 So before we get there, because I do like, that's where years of my paths started to cross, was just after COVID. And I know of some of those stresses that you and I both experienced in our businesses at that time. But before we get there, uh, what did that initial like the growth early on? You were
Mm.
conservative on your estimates. You built out the kitchen or the bakery and kind of everything conservatively, but then you had really good growth. What did that first little timeline look like as far as staffing, number of people, production,
Mhm.
and did you start thinking about larger a larger kitchen, a larger bakery in order to meet capacity needs?
We purposely chose the site because we knew that it could grow to the capacity that we would see it being feasible to. We didn't go into a
Okay.
small site and then have to think about how do we manage the constraint. It's
Right.
only at this point where we are right now that we're actually in the process of looking for a commissary site, but that's because of changes that we're making within the business, like big changes that we're making. When we started, like I said, we did it conservatively. We brought in only the equipment we would need for the first year. And then we made contingency plans based upon, if you hit this threshold, we've got this much funds, this will go towards this investment into this machinery. And when we did the business plan for the actual how to operate the business, we actually drummed out every single position, like every single task you could think that would be needed to be done. And then we
Wow.
drafted them into job descriptions. And then those job descriptions, we kind of made a pyramid of like, how does it go up the ladder? So if this company was, not 2 employees, myself and my business partner, but what if it was 40? Well, who do those 40 people report to? And in which capacities do they do that? And what are their responsibilities? Because we need to know what those are now so that we know, one, what to hold ourselves accountable to in those. We don't want to just fumble through. I mean, you're going to be exhausted. Be exhausted, but at least understand what you have to execute. And then as we were able to, we just started filling in the bottom roles until all the bottom roles were filled. And then you're just left with your jobs, which are much easier when you have all the other roles filled out.
But I think that goes back to, that's exactly what you were talking about early on, is this crazy inverted perspective that you had of having a job and thinking I could work less if I was self-employed, which
Yeah.
isn't normally the case, as you pointed out. But when you think about it in that way, early on, you're saying, okay, almost building that structure to say, how do I design this so that I don't have to work? I'm
Yeah,
not the only one employed to run this business. But in the
yeah,
early days, it was just you and your partner. Is that right?
yeah. For the first 3 weeks, it was just myself and just my business partner. So I
Okay.
did all of the baking, most of all the packaging, helped with customer service. I was
Wow.
also always all the finance. So my position was always that in the CEO, CFO realm. I was always on growth strategy, finance, and then actual product. And then my business partner was anything, we kind of decided it was like back of house, front of house, anything front facing, she took on, and anything internal to external bodies, I would do that.
Right.
So she was the website and any of the customer facing piece, whether it was interacting online with people or interacting in person, all the systems and the policies that we would put in place for customer service, how we display our product, our packaging, all that kind of stuff. That was all her. So, and I mean, we reported to each other. We weren't siloed, right? Any decisions I was making, I'd have to go through her, and any decisions she was making, she'd have to go through me. So we were very linked as far as how to keep it cohesive. Kitchens are stressful. Customer service is stressful. And so we wanted to make sure that even though there was delineation between how and what we were working on, that the messaging stayed the same for the entire company. And it didn't matter what your role was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, without there being a spoiler alert here, I think this will be. Are you still good friends with your business partner?
We were. We
Okay.
were. Honestly, I think we would likely still be. I actually have a lot of respect for her in many avenues. A number of things happened in personal lives,
Yeah.
in her personal life and mine, that it just created um, just that natural
Sure.
kind of separation.
So
But
we'll get, yeah, we'll get to the separation on the business side in a
yeah,
minute. But the you start out with the two of you. First 3 weeks, it's just you working back of house, her working front of house. What is your staff complement now at Origin over that 16 years? What's that growth?
the well, in 2010 we opened that first store, just the two of us. By the end of 2012, we had opened up a second space, which we did as a carbon copy, just straight replication of the first one. We wanted to see how well we could replicate ourselves and not be involved in it.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I wanted to know how well the systems actually worked without our influence.
Right.
So we built that one out. That was in Colwood. We ran that experiment for about 4 years, and then we moved it to a different business model. Instead of being a carbon copy of the first location, we closed that one down. We actually opened a kiosk model in like a little 400 square foot spot where product was just delivered to them every day fresh from the first location. And all they did was accept your money and give you stuff. Walk in, get a cupcake, give
Right.
your money, bye-bye.
Right.
We did that for 3 years. That was wildly successful. There was a lot of development. There still is a lot of development in the West Shore. And there's one specific space that kept coming to us saying, we think you do really well here. We really want you as an anchor tenant. So we took all the money we made and we routed it into the cafe, which is now the Origin Bakery Cafe over at the Belmont Market. And just as we opened that, January 2020, our full complement had grown from the two of us to 42, I believe. There were
Okay.
42 staff at that point.
But only the two locations. At this point, you closed the
yeah.
Yeah.
Those Colwood, Goldstream, now Belmont. So we had
Right.
opened and then closed, opened and then closed, and then opened and have maintained that one. So we've tried 3 different replications of the business model. Each one's been really successful, notwithstanding COVID. But each one's been really well done. Right now, I wanted to make sure that we really understood how streamlined you could operate these spaces and be successful. So I think we're at 27 people now, which is way better. Yeah, way better, way less complicated because the systems have been streamlined down.
So what was the motivation to close those other 2 locations if they were doing so well, especially the kiosk where it's just a footprint that you can deliver to and distribute from?
Yeah, I mean, the kiosk model was fantastic. The customers kept asking for a different experience. The customer base was like, I really want to be able to sit down. I really want to sit down. I really want to sit down. Literally, it was 400 square feet, and you could walk in, you take one step forward, and then you walk back out.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a really big fan of the kiosk one. And this being said, I'm good with people. I'm an extrovert. I prefer not having daily interactions on a customer service level. So the kiosk was great because it was like product.
Get out.
I want to be mentoring people that are working in the business or working on their businesses.
Yeah.
So I mean that's more my jam. But the reason why we closed down the initial one was because we proved concept. But we didn't need 2 fully operating spaces in the same region. That's overkill. So it proved the experiment, but it wasn't a requirement to hold it or to serve that community. The kiosk was really, really successful. But the customer market was like, we really, really, really want to sit down and experience.
Yeah. I want to get back to the business because I really want to talk about your experience with COVID. I've said on a number of times that I don't want this to be a COVID related podcast. But I do think, like, when we talk about the challenges of business, that was really a fundamental piece of it. So, just walk us through what that experience was, getting that notification on March 13th of 2020 that your entire world is going to be flipped on its head.
Well, you know how I started out saying the whole reason why I wanted to do this was to make sure that I had good quality me time.
Right. Yes. I do recall. Yeah.
So if that's the backbone of how I approach work, January 17th, 2020, we opened up the cafe. Just to give context, prior to that, we had no debt in the company. We were actually in a high cash positive space. So we had a lot of collateral to use towards this, like, build out a totally brand new space. By the way, I would never build out a totally brand new space again. It's like buying a brand new car. Buy one that's 2 years old. It's fine. So we got the space up and going. We had taken on some debt, not a lot. We knew it was serviceable. And we hired up the staff. We had them trained. We opened the doors. The customers were coming in. It was really well received. We did the training. It takes us about a week and a half to 2 weeks to get a full staff up and going and walking on their feet. And I wanted to make sure that there was no possible way they would use me as a crutch. So I booked it off to Hawaii. I went to Hawaii for 2 weeks on my own. It was brilliant. Sat on the beach every day, plugged into my iPod, reading novels, drinking gin out of a thermos. It was good. And if they really needed me, they could chat me on Slack and I would get back to them on something.
Right.
But I wanted to make sure that we're true to form and that we can replicate ourselves and leave it in their hands. So I was gone for 2 weeks. That brought me back mid-February. And our staff were just, they were spinning. I've been in management for, at that point, like, I don't know, 15, 16 years at that point. I've hired people and laid off people. I've fired people. Thankfully, not that many. But issuing 32 ROEs on one day, that was hard. Like, that actually still kind of makes tears come to my eyes because it's like, whoa, that many in one day. And they're all feeling really fragile and vulnerable. It was like, oh my God, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And then the next 4 years happened. and now I can safely say that it has always been the hardest thing.
So I want to, one of the questions that I like to ask, and this has happened a couple of times on when I'm interviewing, is the hardest day that you've had in business. And a couple of times it's happened that the hardest day is exactly the one that you described, is the layoffs related to COVID. In fact, in many cases, in the conversations I'm having, it's been related to layoffs, not all of them around COVID. So it's really that connection that we build to our staff, that trust that we build with the staff, and that they trust us that we're going to continue to provide them a livelihood of some sort, and we're trusting that they're going to help us achieve success in our business. And there's you kind of feel like there's a breach of that trust when you didn't succeed in your side of the bargain.
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate in the fact that I think about we retained 10 throughout the whole piece. Like we always had a core of 10 and we retained all of those. And then there's natural attrition just because of the demographic that we typically hire.
Yeah.
But I think we had another 10 from the pool that we laid off that did come back. Those that didn't come back, it's because they weren't in the city.
Oh yeah.
Like they just didn't come back to Victoria.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it is that connection that you build with your staff, but it's also like, I mean, anybody who's been a manager, let alone being the actual employer, knows that when you bring somebody in and you spend 3 to 6 months to a year, depending on the skill sets that they're utilizing in your company, and then you have to let all of the skill set, all of it, go all at once. There's just the sheer amount of investment that you see just get wiped out.
Yeah.
So there's the personal connection that you have for like what that means for the people that you're laying off. And also like that, just the personal relationship aspect. Unfortunately, what has happened with COVID and that transactional piece has made employment very transactional.
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody in the food industry. I don't know of anybody in the food industry right now that employment is not a transaction now. It used to be, family restaurant, family run. People are like, they have a connection, they have familial relationships, not like I'm your son and daughter family, but you create these familial bonds within the spaces. And so people used to stay for, 6, 7 or more, like a decade. And they're a part of the fabric of the experience for your customers and for themselves and for you. We had people in Origin that worked for us for like 9 years. Like the shortest amount of time somebody used to work for us was like 2.5 years, 3 years. And our normal turnaround was like 5 to 7. So those are good spans in the F&B world. Except for my key management, I don't have anybody that has been with me for that long. The short norm these days is 6 to 9 months. Because after 6 months or 9 months, people are like, oh, I don't know. I think I'm not quite sure. Or A big one is my mental health needs to take a priority. And I'm
Right.
like, you work part-time customer service.
Right. Yeah. But so
Yeah.
that's really interesting. I really like that kind of differentiation or acknowledgement of the difference, the transactional versus familial kind of environment that's evolved in a post-COVID world. Would you say the transactional aspect is led by the employees or by employers
Mm,
or both?
I think it's I think it's on the employer to not be reactionary.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, I think it's really on the employers to not be reactionary to what is influencing their employees' decisions.
Interesting.
Um, we don't have it, sorry, this is something that really pisses me off lately. Is there's this idea that if you provide enough support, resource, system, community framework, my favorite, like
Yeah, yeah,
if you
yeah.
give a really positive environment, your employees will buy in and they're locked in, right? Like if you provide extended benefits, that's a real attribute. And if you give them extended vacation time, or if you give them high flexibility within their schedule or their tasks or their ability to do their work, you if you create this, 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 and this, make it the most utopian environment, your staff is going to be well invested in making sure that they are involved and they'll stay. And it's not true.
Yeah. I knew that's where you were
It
going.
is
Yeah.
not true. Those are not sticking points. Sticking points for people are, do you value my time? And even if you do, how they wanted to spend their time will change dramatically over the course of a year.
I think that's such an important acknowledgement, right? And I'm sure a lot of people, well, of the three people that'll be listening to this podcast, at least a couple of them will be able to appreciate and agree with that sentiment. And it's the one of the constant push and pulls of being a business owner, being a manager, being responsible for other people and their income and their livelihood, is trying to accommodate, trying to keep them happy, but to what end and at the risk of what to the business and to yourself, right?
Yeah, it's a cost, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not necessarily a financial cost, but it is sometimes a much heavier cost than the
Yes.
finance side.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to hear about the last 4 years because you've talked about it twice. You've kind of hinted at it, and I want to know. So, what? Give me the Reader's Digest version of the last 4 years.
COVID's not over.
Okay.
It's like the longest roller coaster ride I think any of us have been on. And that's why I totally respect that you do not want this podcast to be a COVID podcast. I think COVID's going to be referenced in the frame of business like the Industrial Revolution has been.
Right.
I think the global effect and then the like local micro effect is yet to be fully understood.
Yeah.
For us, we are incredibly fortunate to have such a very loyal customer base. That is the only reason why we're still going. We were in a really strong financial space before COVID hit. That's the only reason why we've been able to weather it. And I mean, the last year has been juggling debt for debt. It's not getting ourselves out of debt. It's just juggling debt for other debt, moving the debt from one pile to the other. You have small businesses that are over the course of the last year, I don't know, 4 years in BC, you have so much more that you have to pay out that was never a part of our plate.
Yeah.
Like the employer health tax,
Yeah.
for an example, right? Like that was never something we had to hold. That
Yeah.
was a governmental space. And all of a sudden, no, you have to pay this. And it was like, with what?
Right.
And so like there's all those different facets, like different programs that have been put in place or different thresholds that have been put into play that the brand, like just the actual pressure and no choice in the say of the matter has created this unbelievably hard space, like to reconcile. In Victoria, in the last 8 months, 15 restaurants have shut down. This last weekend, too.
Yeah.
And like quality places, good quality places. Not the shoddy kind of like, I wasn't really ever going to survive.
Everybody's operating on the brink, right? Like I really fundamentally believe that, like, especially complex operations like yours and restaurants, and when you have, you know, higher staffing complements and all of the regulatory compliance pieces, like I can't even imagine the complexity of policy that you need to follow in order to ensure, like, obviously food and safety and all of those kinds of things, but to ensure that your employees are operating in an environment that they feel safe and that is required,
Exactly.
right?
No,
The transition with your business partner, I just want to touch on that really quick. How did that come to be?
I mean, when it comes down to it, it was pretty simple. When I said we were really structured with how we set up the business, when we set up our shareholders agreement to show how to dissolve it. Like, so we had a system in play on how to close that partnership at the time that we opened it. We knew that at some point we wouldn't be in business together anymore for any reason that could become apparent. But we wanted to make sure when that time came, we'd be able to exercise it in a way that it wouldn't make it like the messiest divorce ever.
Yep.
So she came to me. I knew that she would probably have left the business 2 years before she did, had different things in our personal lives not happen. I mean, I'm an open book. My husband chose to leave after 20 years. And she was probably ready to leave the business in and around that same time that he made that choice. However, she was like, oh, I'm not going to leave you the business on your own while you're trying to manage what this is going to mean. So it was, it was about a year and a half after my marriage had kind of gone through that transition that she came to me, and it was shortly after COVID had started that she was like, I can't, I'm so exhausted. She's like, I just don't have it in me. And I was like, I get it. That's totally fine. And she's like, well, do you still like work? And I'm like, I do. I mean, I don't like what's going on presently, but do I like what I do with work? Do I like how I engage with it? Do I like what we provide? All of that. I said, that feeds me. So yeah, no, I'm good. And I'm like, and you can leave and I'm not gonna, I hold no grudge.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna be fine. Worst possible time.
Yeah.
For that transition to happen. Mainly because if she had made that choice, even a year earlier, what we chose to do with the business would have been drastically different.
Yeah.
And she would have walked away with a really good chunk of money. But because she made the decision after the effects of everything, like basically I
took on the
how
debt.
we decided to figure this out was I forgave her debt. So I'm happy with my ethics in that choice.
Yeah.
However, that was probably likely the dumbest business decision I ever made, because it just compounded the effects of what the last couple of years have been as far as that financial need from
and just extended them, right? Like you're under the weight of that for longer. Yeah.
Yeah. And instead of it being borne by two partners, it's on one.
Right.
So it's just, that part's been an exhausting little treadmill to run. But what it has done is gave me the ability to do a bunch of stuff like, hey, meet you.
Yeah.
Did the MBA.
Sorry about that.
Because I needed a really healthy distraction.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thrilled that I did it. I'm thrilled that I got to meet you too.
Aww.
Yeah, the MBA gave me a lot of ability to place some time on some really specific ideas, learn a lot of information. And so 2 weeks ago, I opened up a franchisor corporation, and now we're able to sell franchises of Origin.
Wow.
So
I didn't see that coming.
So
Kind of a mic drop
Spoiler.
there. Yeah. Okay. So here I was going to. We do have to wrap up. I want to, but I'll dive into this a little bit. Um, so what does that look like for you? Kind of in best case scenario, your kind of ideal vision. You start. Based on what you've talked about. It sounds like I assume you'll start conservatively. You've kind of got a very structured plan. I can't see you doing anything without kind of all the T's crossed and I's dotted. But you like ultimately you see Origin as being a global entity or a national entity or just across the province of British Columbia.
No, definitely go international.
Yeah.
We're gonna start, well, we have started in Victoria. We have 2 existing sites that we can sell as site-specific franchises. There's one, we'll call it theoretical site in Victoria that we think is probably fairly viable to sell that as a franchise space too. So we're in the process actually. We listed the Belmont location a week and a half ago, and we've got a couple of interested parties on that one. We're going to list the Pandora location. That's the original one. Probably in June, mid-June. And once we have that done, we're moving the kitchen into a main commissary. The commissary will supply the franchises with their core baked goods, and then the franchises work like the Belmont Market Cafe does, where they're coffee shops that are entirely
Right.
gluten-free, but
Wow.
they're community-based. So then the plan is to open up another commissary in Vancouver in 2025 and look at selling probably 6 to 10 franchises over there. Use that as the market for expansion. And then the bigger long-term goal, and probably a huge surprise to you, is that I want to see it operating in Japan. We're going to work down the western, like the West
Right.
Coast corridor
Right.
of the US. But where gluten-free was in North America about 15 years ago is where Japan and Korea are now.
Oh wow.
And they're so much faster at adoption. I was in Japan for a month in November with 2 celiac kids, so we had to source out a lot, which
Yeah.
was excellent market research.
Yeah.
And the adoption and the scale in which they're doing that in is really interesting. And what we can do, still nobody does it as well as we do. So yeah, I'm interested to see how far we can go. How I don't want to do it at a breakneck speed, but I
Yeah.
definitely think if we get enough investment. So that's my plug, Trevor. I need investment. I need people to give me money so that they get money for that, so that we can grow this up and make it really, really successful.
Well, maybe you'll be lucky, and one of the 3 listeners will want to invest in Origin Bakery.
One of your 3 investors needs to contact me and say, your idea is brilliant.
Yeah.
The traction's great. Let me know how to help. And I say, I need money. I
Okay.
need money for marketing.
I want to close on this note because I think one of the highlights I would say is your ability to manage kind of that personal versus business, right? And really identify that for yourself. And now moving into kind of a global aspirations, if nothing less, of a global environment, and that's going to bring its own challenges and new demands on your time and your. What would be your biggest piece of advice for any listener out there that is aspiring to get into business, that is in business, small or medium, to continue to be able to navigate what they want to do, but balance and manage that against kind of the personal expectations of their life?
I think you really need to understand what the supports are around you. Like, what are your personal supports? What are you expected to be giving versus what do you expect others to give you? So really understand that. Like, if you're married and you have children, those are demands of a mental and emotional and physical nature. That means if you have 100% capacity all the time, you really only have 50%.
Right.
because 50% of that is being given to that. Those are crucial things, right? And a lot of people, they don't invest that awareness. And so when you start working really long hours, or your attention's always divided, right? Like you're at your kid's soccer game, but you're on your phone the entire time, communicating with people about your business. Like physically you're present, but mentally you're not there.
Yep.
It's those challenges that I see a lot with the people that I mentor. When I travel, especially if I'm, I purposely get myself off the continent. Like
Right.
last summer, I went to Greece, and then I went to Japan. I take the SIM card out of my phone. I use an international SIM card, and there are only a select amount of people that can actually get my attention.
Wow.
So I'm very intentional about respecting other people's time when they are at work and when they're not at work. And I am very careful about making sure they understand that the same goes for me.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. Really understand how much support you have to be giving versus how much you need. And then really, really think long and hard about how much of yourself and how much of your brain power and capacity you're willing to give to any one project. Like if you're somebody that really puts a lot of value in giving back to your community, then there's going to be this sense of philanthropy that will not go away, even if you're giving 110% to your business. You're probably likely one of those people that will still say yes if somebody's like,
Right.
hey, can you do this?
Yep.
Did you show up for that?
Yep.
And when we start doing those different things, that we provide our own access to burnout. And I think that's really dangerous. So I think it's just being very cognizant of what you're saying yes to for yourself and what you're saying yes to other people, and then rationalizing it in ways that it sits well with you.
Yeah.
People that go into being entrepreneurs, everybody calls them like A-type personalities. Not everybody's an A-type personality. No. Not everybody actually needs to be in control. I have a weird relationship with control. I need about 10%. I need 10% control. And the rest of it, I'm super flexible about. So if something's not going the way I think it should need to go, I usually look at how everybody else is interacting with it and figure out how to pivot in and around those movements. That's a personality trait for me, but I've found it to be an incredible strength in how I actually have orchestrated my life around all of this.
Very, very amazing. I think that like there's been a ton of lessons in this conversation, and that's one of my goals. I'm hoping that people can listen to these, not feel alone, right? Like I think that's a big thing in the business world, is understanding that, you know, even the perceivedly successful businesses are sometimes struggling, or at least have gone through their struggles in order to get to where they are. So thank you so much for being vulnerable and open, and sharing your story and these lessons for folks. Tara Black, it's been a true pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trevor Coot.